37 emails, neatly stacked, unanswered, forgotten. I scrolled through them with a strange kind of detachment. Each one, a silent echo of the year I spent believing that respect could be earned by staying quiet. Maybe you know that feeling when your effort fades into the background, invisible to the very people who once praised you. This isn't just a story about a raise. It's about something far deeper. Stay with me. I think you'll see a part of yourself in what happened next. When I first walked into the glass-walled lobby of Halden & Co., I truly believed I had found my forever home. I was 34, full of energy, ambition, burning under my skin like a quiet flame. 12 years later, I was still there, older, wiser, carrying more than my fair share of the company's financial backbone. I had built systems that saved millions, negotiated contracts that stabilized entire divisions, led my team through mergers and audits without a single blemish. I wasn't a rising star anymore. I was the infrastructure. On the surface, Halden & Co. loved to celebrate success, polished newsletters, team lunches. The occasional framed certificate hung in crowded hallways. Smiles were plentiful, so were promises. But beneath that glossy exterior, true recognition was reserved for a few. The loud, the flashy, the political. Still, I believed that my work would speak for itself. I wasn't looking for applause. I just wanted fairness. It was early March when I sent my first formal email to Mr. Calhoun, my direct manager, requesting a salary review. I remember the care I took drafting it, highlighting key achievements, attaching performance metrics, linking it all back to company goals. I hit send with a hopeful heart. A week passed. Nothing. Another week, still nothing. At first, I thought maybe he was busy. I gave it time. I didn't want to be that person, the one who nags, who pushes. At Halden, patience was an unspoken rule for people like me. Spring melted into summer. Our department hit record numbers. I drafted another email this time, even more succinct, more data-driven, more deferential. Silence. I began to notice small things. Meetings where my ideas were nodded at but never credited. Initiatives I spearheaded, that somehow once successful had someone else's name attached to them when presented higher up. Promotions announced for newer employees who hadn't yet seen a single fiscal year through. Still, I told myself, stay steady, play the long game. I kept sending emails, carefully spaced out, always professional, always factual. I documented everything: performance wins, revenue, impacts, cross-functional projects. By autumn, I had sent 6 emails, each one a seed planted in dry, unyielding soil. No answers, just the same strained smiles in the hallway, the same non-committal nods when I mentioned department milestones. One rainy Monday morning, I overheard 2 junior analysts chatting near the break room. They didn't notice me standing around the corner. "You know how it is," one of them laughed. "The only people who get raises around here are the ones who scream loud enough." The words hit harder than they should have. It wasn't anger that flooded through me first. It was sadness, a deep, weary kind of sadness that settled in my chest like damp, heavy cloth. Had I really believed, after all these years, that quiet dedication would be enough, that merit alone would lift me? I stood there for a long moment, listening to the rain tap against the windows, feeling something inside me begin to shift, something I couldn't quite name yet, but that I knew would not be silenced again. That morning marked the first small fracture in my loyalty, a tiny crack that would soon split wide open. I wish I could tell you that realization alone was enough to change things. But it wasn't. Not yet. After that rainy morning, I doubled down on my work, on my professionalism, on my belief that maybe, just maybe, effort would still win the day. I wanted to believe it so badly that I swallowed the growing knot of doubt in my chest and kept moving forward. By winter, I had sent 12 emails, each one crafted with care, each one presenting not just requests but solutions. how my raise could align with departmental goals, how it would reflect the savings and revenue my team had generated. I didn't plead. I didn't demand. I built a logical, respectful case and trusted it to stand on its own. And yet, each email was met with the same weaponized silence. Mr. Calhoun began to avoid eye contact in meetings. He called on me less. He assigned new projects to others' projects. I was clearly the most qualified to lead. Promotions were announced without so much as a courtesy conversation. Bonuses were distributed, and my name was missing from the list, despite metrics that should have made me a frontrunner. One afternoon in January, after a department town hall, I approached Mr. Calhoun directly. I chose my words carefully, my tone even. Mr. Calhoun, I was hoping we could schedule some time to review my salary and role progression. I've sent a few emails, but I understand how busy things get. He smiled that tight managerial smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, Nova, he said. We'll circle back. Timing's just tricky right now. Circle back timing? Empty phrases that fluttered down between us like dead leaves. I thanked him. Because that's what was expected. Because confrontation, real confrontation, would only paint me as difficult. I turned away, feeling the heat of frustration bloom under my skin, but forcing my expression to remain neutral. Always neutral. Inside, something was cracking wider. I began to notice more, now that I allowed myself to see it. How newer hires fresh out of graduate programs were being fast-tracked into leadership pipelines. How men who had been with the company half as long as I had were given stretch assignments. Exposure to executive teams. The language of potential woven into every evaluation. And me, I was the reliable one. The steady pair of hands they didn't have to think about. The one who carried the weight silently so others could run faster. The one who disappeared behind results. One evening, staying late to finalize end-of-year reports, I found myself alone in the office. The city outside was dark and cold windows reflecting endless rows of lights. I looked at my computer screen, at the spreadsheet, tracking my team's accomplishments, and a sudden sharp thought pierced through the fog. They were never going to acknowledge me, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they had no incentive to. I had made it easy for them to forget I had a voice. I sat there for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen, the hum of the building's heating system filling the silence. And I realized patience wasn't noble anymore. It was a cage. The conflict wasn't just between me and Mr. Calhoun. It was between the person I had been and the person I needed to become. By the time I shut down my computer that night, I wasn't angry, I was clear. And for the first time in a long while, that clarity felt more powerful than any apology or overdue recognition ever could. A few weeks after that late night alone in the office, something shifted. Not in me, I had already crossed a threshold. I couldn't uncross, but in the air around me. One Monday morning, as I sipped coffee at my desk, a Slack notification popped up. It was from Mr. Calhoun. Let's set up some time to review your compensation and role growth. Appreciate your patience. For a moment, I just stared at the message, unsure if I had read it correctly. After a year of silence, of evasion, of manufactured busyness, now suddenly he wanted to talk. I told myself to stay calm. I typed a polite reply, suggesting a few times later that week. Inside, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months stirred. Maybe finally someone had realized the injustice. Maybe persistence had paid off after all. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I spent the days leading up to it preparing. I pulled together a portfolio of my achievements, project outcomes, savings reports, leadership feedback. I rehearsed calm, clear ways to present my case without resentment. I wasn't walking into that room with anger. I was walking in with truth. Thursday came gray and heavy, outside rain streaking the windows. I walked into the small conference room where Mr. Calhoun was waiting, laptop open, notes spread across the table. He smiled warmly, gesturing for me to sit. Nova, he began. I want to start by thanking you for your incredible contributions. You've been a rock for this department. My heart knocked hard against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral. He spoke of my leadership, my reliability, my value to the team. He mentioned budget constraints, of course, but emphasized that my case was compelling and important to the leadership team. Finally, he said, I've recommended a market adjustment to your salary. It's still pending final review, but I expect good news soon. Good news soon, words that should have felt like victory. And yet there was something hollow in the way he said it. Something practiced, controlled. As I nodded and thanked him, that flicker of hope glowed brighter. But it wavered too, like a candle in a room with a window cracked open to a storm. I wanted to believe I needed to believe, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet part of me whispered, not yet. Because promises at Halden & Co. had a way of evaporating. Because I had seen too many soons turn into maybe next quarters. Because experience had taught me that good intentions weren't guarantees. Still, when I left that room, there was a lift in my chest I hadn't felt in months. A fragile, cautious lift, but a lift nonetheless. That night, I allowed myself a small celebration, nothing extravagant, just a good meal at home, a favorite movie, a few quiet hours where hope felt less like a liability and more like a possible future. I even drafted a thank you email reiterating my excitement to continue contributing at a high level. I pressed send with steady hands, determined to hold on to optimism even if just a little while longer. Looking back now, I realized that moment was like standing on a thin patch of ice still intact, but already starting to crack beneath the surface. Sometimes hope is the most dangerous thing we cling to. And sometimes it's the very thing that gives us the strength to see things through. Have you ever held on to hope, even when your instincts warned you otherwise? If you have, I would love to hear your story. Please share it in the comments below. Your experience might just be the light someone else needs. 2 weeks passed. At first, I gave it no thought. I told myself that approvals took time, that budgets were complicated, that patience was still the right response. But as the days stretched longer, that fragile lift in my chest began to sink. Each morning, I scanned my inbox before I even sipped my coffee, half hoping, half dreading what I would or wouldn't find. There was no update from Mr. Calhoun. No salary adjustment, no formal meeting, only silence. Again. The old familiar silence that now felt like an old wound being reopened. Still, I waited. I told myself stories to soothe the sting. Maybe it was the fiscal year-end chaos. Maybe HR was overloaded. Maybe he was simply too busy to update me yet. But then, during a casual team meeting one Friday afternoon, Mr. Calhoun dropped a bomb without even realizing it. He announced the promotions for the upcoming year. 3 names, all men. All newer than me. All smiling like kids, handed golden tickets. Not mine. He spoke warmly about fresh leadership energy and rewarding bold innovation. He made eye contact with everyone except me. I sat there still and composed, taking notes as if my hands weren't trembling slightly. Inside, a hollow space opened up wide and cold. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just felt colder, harder, as if some soft, hopeful part of me had finally turned to stone. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk with mechanical steps. I opened my laptop, pulled up the spreadsheet where I had tracked every achievement, every cost-saving measure, every client retention win. I had helped secure all of it. Months, years. And none of it had been enough to even warrant acknowledgement. Later that evening, when most of the office had cleared out, Mr. Calhoun stopped by my desk. He smiled almost sheepishly. "Sorry we haven't circled back yet, Nova," he said, voice casual. "Budget's been tighter than expected. We'll revisit things next quarter. Okay? Appreciate your understanding." He tapped my desk lightly, as if closing a harmless conversation. I nodded. Because that's what was expected. Because professionalism had been drilled so deep into me that even betrayal had to be swallowed quietly. but inside I felt something far different than anger. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sorrow. It was a quiet, clean severance. Something inside me had detached final and irreversible, as if the invisible tether that had tied me to this company for 12 years had finally, blessedly snapped. I realized then that I was no longer fighting for a raise. I was fighting for the basic recognition of my existence. And if they couldn't or wouldn't see me, after all this time, they never would. When I left the office that night, the sky was heavy with low, bruised clouds. The street smelled of cold metal and forgotten rain. I zipped my coat higher against the wind and walked slower than usual to the train station, letting the chill soak through. I wanted to feel it. I needed to feel it, to memorize the weight of that night, so I would never again forget the price of waiting for permission to matter. That was the moment I truly let go, not with bitterness, not with drama, but with a deep, steady finality that came from finally seeing the truth and choosing quietly, but completely, to never be invisible again. I didn't quit that night. That would have been too easy and too visible. Instead, I decided to do something far more deliberate. I decided to prepare quietly, carefully, without any announcement or anger. Because if they had taught me anything, it was that loudness wasn't respected here. Silence was. And so I made my silence sharp. I started by seeing every piece of evidence I could find. The chain of emails I had sent over the past year. Performance evaluations. Departmental savings reports. Records of projects I had led and accounts I had salvaged. It wasn't about revenge. It was about preserving the truth, about refusing to let my story be erased or rewritten by anyone else. At night, after finishing my regular workload, I stayed behind to comb through documents no one noticed. People are rarely suspicious of the quiet ones. I backed up everything onto a private drive. I documented timelines. I organized proof. Meanwhile, by day, I smiled through meetings. I completed every project on time. I answered every email professionally, courteously, without missing a beat. But inwardly, I had shifted from someone hoping to stay to someone preparing to leave. One afternoon, while finalizing a budget proposal, I received another Slack message from Mr. Calhoun, a casual reminder about team spirit, about everyone pulling together during tough financial times. The irony was almost laughable. I typed a short, polite response. I didn't owe him anything more. By now, my view of Halden & Co. had changed completely. What once looked like a place of opportunity now appeared for what it truly was. A well-decorated cage. The decision to leave wasn't impulsive. It wasn't fueled by rage. It was a slow, conscious unwinding of hope and the steady building of a new foundation beneath myself. I began quietly reaching out to trusted contacts, not broadcasting, not complaining, just letting the right people know that perhaps soon I might be open to new opportunities. It felt strange at first, disloyal almost. But then I remembered loyalty without reciprocity isn't virtue, it's self-betrayal. I refused to betray myself any longer. One evening, while sorting through old emails, I stumbled across one of my first messages to Mr. Calhoun, the one where I had so carefully laid out my case for a raise full of hope, full of belief. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, not mourning, not regretting, just recognizing how much I had grown, recognizing how different I had become. I wasn't the woman who wrote that email anymore. I wasn't waiting for validation from someone who didn't see me. I was preparing to choose myself. Have you ever reached a quiet turning point, the moment you realized it was time to stop waiting and start moving? If you have, I would love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone who's still standing at the crossroads. I didn't slam doors. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call anyone out in meetings or write fiery emails meant to expose and shame. No, that was never my way, and it never needed to be. Instead, I let the truth speak for itself. A week before submitting my resignation, I carefully compiled a complete package, a detailed timeline of every contribution I had made over the last 3 years. highlighting revenue increases, cost savings, and department turnarounds that could be directly linked to my work. Attached to it were the 37 unanswered emails I had sent over the past 12 months, each one timestamped, each one professional, factual, respectful, and ignored. I didn't send the package to Mr. Calhoun. I sent it directly to the CEO, the CFO, and the head of HR with a short, courteous cover letter explaining my intent to resign and my gratitude for the years of experience gained. There was no anger in my words, only clarity. I didn't have to embellish anything. The silence of leadership was written into the fabric of every ignored email, every dismissed request. All I had to do was let them see what had been hidden in plain sight. I hit send. And then I waited, not out of fear, but with a kind of calm curiosity, like watching the first drops of rain hit dry earth and knowing a storm would soon follow. It didn't take long. Less than 24 hours later, I received an email from the CEO requesting an urgent meeting. I agreed politely, setting the time for the following morning. When I entered the executive conference room, the tension was so thick, you could almost see it hanging in the air. Mr. Calhoun was already seated at the far end of the table, his posture stiff, his hands clenching and unclenching under the polished surface. The CEO began by thanking me for bringing serious concerns to light. He spoke carefully, as if measuring every word. There was no defensiveness, no excuses, there was only acknowledgement. For the first time, someone in leadership wasn't looking past me. They were looking directly at me, and they were seeing Mr. Calhoun was asked to explain the chain of events. He mumbled something about timing and workload and no ill intent. But the excuses fell flat. The emails told their own story. A story of willful neglect of a leader who had chosen convenience over fairness. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a slow, undeniable collapse of the narrative Mr. Calhoun had built around himself. By the end of the meeting, the CEO assured me that immediate changes would be made to internal process regarding employee development and salary reviews. He expressed regret that it had taken my resignation to bring these issues into the open. He also offered me a significant promotion, a substantial raise, and a direct reporting line to him if I chose to stay. It would have been easy to say yes. It would have been tempting to accept the recognition that had been so long overdue, but the woman sitting in that conference room was not the same woman who had once waited by her inbox for scraps of acknowledgement. She was someone who understood now that true worth isn't granted by titles or salaries or belated apologies. It's something you claim for yourself and carry with you wherever you go. I declined the offer kindly but firmly. I thanked them for the opportunity, and then I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of that room, out of that chapter of my life. With my head held high, Mr. Calhoun remained seated as I left, staring down at the table. His downfall hadn't come at my hands. It had come from the weight of his own choices, the missed chances, the ignored voices, the silent dismissal of those who had held his department together while he looked the other way. All I had done was shine a light on what was already broken. That afternoon, when I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. I wasn't carrying their failures anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone else to see my value. I had seen it myself, and that was enough. If you've ever chosen to walk away rather than stay somewhere, you weren't valued. You know the freedom I'm talking about. It's not just leaving a job, it's reclaiming your name, your voice, your story, and sometimes that quiet victory is the most powerful strike of all. I sent my final email on a Friday morning, simple, direct, gracious. I informed Mr. Calhoun and the leadership team that I would be resigning, effective 2 weeks from that day. I thanked them for the opportunities I had been given. I made no accusations. I offered no explanations. I simply closed the chapter with the same quiet professionalism I had carried all along. No one expected it. Not really. There were polite emails of surprise. There were awkward smiles in the hallways. There were a few hurried attempts at last-minute meetings. I politely declined because by then my mind was already elsewhere on the life I was stepping into, not the one I was leaving behind. During my notice period, I worked as diligently as ever. I handed off projects. I documented processes. I left everything better than I found it. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to leave with my dignity intact. 2 days before my final day, I received an unexpected email. It was from the CEO. He had seen the chain of emails I had forwarded. Calm, factual, undeniable. He apologized for what he called a failure of leadership and communication. He offered me a promotion, a raise, and a seat at the strategic table if I chose to stay. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling nothing. Maybe once, a long time ago, that offer would have set my heart racing. Maybe once I would have grabbed it like a life raft in rough seas. But not now, because the woman who had waited and hoped and stayed quiet was gone. I politely declined. I wished them well, and then, on my last day, I walked out of Halden & Co. for the final time. No parade, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of my own heels against the marble floor. The weight of 12 years falling away behind me with every step. Outside the sun was shining. It was the kind of day that felt too bright for goodbyes. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, the crisp air, the sharp clarity of it all. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with the one thing they could never take from me, my sense of worth. A few weeks later, I started a new chapter at a company that valued transparency growth and true leadership. It wasn't just a new job, it was a reclamation. It was a choice to never again settle for being unseen. Looking back now, I don't regret a single email I sent or a single moment I spent hoping. Because each step, each disappointment had led me here. Here, where my voice is no longer something I apologize for. Here where my value is recognized without begging for acknowledgement. Here where I remember every day that respect isn't something you earn from people who refuse to see you. Respect is something you grant yourself first and fiercely. If you've ever walked away from a place that couldn't see your worth, know this. You didn't lose anything, you found yourself. And that, my friend, is everything.